If you are, we'll click on that one instead. If you are a YouTube subscriber, you will have gotten a notification if you've got your notifications turned on. I know it says 3 minutes and 12 seconds, but I think we may get started a little bit earlier than that. But just to let people get settled and get comfortable for today's show. It is a bit of an incidental episode. I know that we are going twice a week on a Wednesday and on a Sunday. We usually just do this on a Sunday Sunday morning for myself. Sunday evening for myself, Sunday morning for the West Coast. But this is a bit of a special one because yesterday we were going to hopefully talk to J.H. Williams. By the way, that's something we are going to have to work out. How do I address you, sir?
Jim is fine.
Jim is fine. I wanted to just check. We're going to be talking to Jim, J.H. Williams III, very shortly indeed. If you do have any comments or any questions, jump in, of course, on the chat. If you've got any questions about his art, any of the projects that he's been involved in, of which there are numerous, and of course anything that you want to bring up. It is just going to be about Jim tonight, so which means we're not going to be doing our cup of tea artist spotlight or our crowdfunding spotlight. We'll save those for Sunday, but I think we'll ask Jim about his favorite artists and any crowdfunding things that have caught his attention, but we'll get into that very shortly indeed. As always, if you are wanting to support the Hangout, if you want to go to patreon.com/EnglishmanSDCC. At the moment, as a DJ, and with all the venues closed here in the UK, I'm currently not earning a penny. So basically, I could do with any kind of support that you can throw my way, even if it's a couple of dollars. Really would appreciate it. Patreon.com/EnglishmanSDCC. On Monday, we did post the Double Clicks live concert album, which they did in Leeds in 2019. It was really great for them to allow me to put that up for Patreon supporters, and I am going to be putting a lot of Patreon exclusive stuff up over the course of the next couple of weeks. So please, if you do want to throw some money into the pot, you'll be getting some free bonus stuff for your efforts. So there we go. It's the top of the hour. It says 55 seconds, but you know what? I'm just going to dive straight into this, and we'll sack that off and say this is In Conversation with J.H. Williams III. My name is Len Sultana. This is Talking Con, a cup of tea with an Englishman in San Diego. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. It's a bit of a special one, and because this is a spotlight interview with an amazing artist, and it's just a pleasure to have him join us. J.H. Williams III. Jim, hello there. Welcome along, sir.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm going to turn all this off because we do have your work scrolling by in a bit of a slideshow, which we're going to let that roll in the background because it's an audio only interview for yourself, and that's fine. But that means we get to see some of your amazing artwork on screen while we talk to you. It's just great to have you joining us. It's going to be kind of like a bit of a loose conversation. We'll get into all sorts of bits and pieces along the way. But I think we'll start with a slight slant on the old traditional chestnut of how you got into comics. I think we'll start. Can you actually remember the first comic that you actually went, you know what, I like this. This is for me. This is my gateway drug. I like this one. Can you remember if there was a specific issue, a specific book that you remember picking up and reading?
For sure. I mean, when I was a kid, I read all kinds of comics, but I really didn't grasp what they, how they were made. So, but the first comic that really made a big impression on me, particularly because I found myself at a very young age trying to draw the various characters I would read, like Iron Man and Spider-Man and so on. But for me was my discovery of the Micronauts comic book. And it sort of was a gateway because I was in love with the toys. So as a child, I mean, I was obsessed with these toys. And so the first time I saw a Micronauts comic book, which was Micronauts #1, in a spinner rack at a convenience store, when comics used to be sold at those things, I had to buy it. And I was so excited about it that I couldn't wait to get it at home to read. I sat on the stoop and started reading it. And it was one of the first comics, I think, that I don't know if it had had to do with my obsession over the toys or not, but I was so enamored with the story and the artwork that I ended up paying attention to every little detail. And it's one of the first times I really, really understood the credits box. Of course, in a lot of the comics I read before then, you always saw, Amazing Spider-Man with the little thing on there on page 1, presented by Stan Lee. So I knew who Stan Lee was, but I really didn't pay much attention to anything else until I read Micronauts #1. And that was by Michael Golden and Bill Mantlo. And quickly fell in love with it, was blown away by it. Even today, when I look at those issues, how impressive they are, and the fact that they don't talk down to you. It's just incredible work. And so that was my first real discovery, artistic discovery. And I showed another childhood friend of mine at the time this comic book, and he's like, "Oh, well, if you like that, you have to see this thing called Uncanny X-Men." And so I saw that and saw how great that was, but in a very different way than Micronauts. And that's sort of what set the tone for me. Like, hey, I like to draw. I think I'm going to do this. My career path decision at age 8.
You really did go all the way in then. Fantastic. Were you drawing at that point as well? Were you, as a kid, were you sort of like sketching at all, or was that something that came later?
Yeah, I was doing little drawings and stuff from my earliest memories. So and some of the earliest memories I have were drawing some of the Marvel characters, the more famous Marvel characters, or trying to draw them anyway.
It's interesting that you start with Micronauts, because you speak to a number of comic creators, and they remember poring over the comic strips and the Sunday strips in their newspapers, and seeing that those kind of condensed stories. Micronauts, I know as a comic, was very kind of like contained stories per issue, but then to go on to Uncanny X-Men, which has this sprawling arc work of stories. Which were the ones which kind of grabbed your attention first? Was it those one and dones, or was it the large epic storylines?
I don't know. I kind of feel like a little bit of both, really. Micronauts, even though each issue kind of had its own little thing going on, it did feed a greater narrative, and that, and then I guess that was reinforced by seeing how longer narrative focus X-Men was, into understanding comics were more than just a one-off little floppy comic book and then it's done over. You could go beyond that with the story. So
no, it makes sense. And also it's great that you kind of like were paying attention to the creators even back then, and even those early kind of books that you were reading. I mean, other than the ones for Micronauts, was there any other creators that did catch your attention and you kept returning to?
Yeah, I lived in the Bay Area as a kid, so I got exposed to some things that might not have been as easily accessible living in other parts of the country. So I, very early on came across things by, Mobius and some other European creators, Jack Kirby, of course. I, at an early age, fell in love with Commandy and Eternals and stuff like that from Jack Kirby. His less famous works, I guess you could say. So there was definitely a wide variety of things I was exposed to at a young age in terms of artistic styles that you could find in comics, and that probably has fed some of my own creative direction by being so enamored with various things like that at an early age.
Especially, I can imagine working over both pages, the large expressive panels, and the way that Kirby kind of sort of like the narrative moved around the page and moved around the pages, and over the course of a double page spread. I can definitely see that influence in your work.
Yeah. And then, that translated over to early exposure to Jim Steranko and some of the things he was doing. yeah, definitely all came out. And some of those influences I really didn't think about that much. They weren't conscious influences when I first started doing this professionally. But in retrospect, you go back and go, oh yeah, okay, I see how I came to where I'm at from these roots, you know?
Yeah. I mean, what was your timeline? You know, I mean, you're talking there about when you kind of took the idea of making comics professionally. I mean, what was your timeline when it comes to comics? Because I know that you studied is advertising and art design.
Yeah.
And were you doing comic artwork at that point as well, or I mean, what was the kind of the way that the two disciplines kind of flew together?
Yeah, I was trying to draw comics, you know, or at least always in some fashion. I even remember trying to do the the old Marvel tryout book that they offered, and failing miserably at that. But I think you know, it was something I always wanted to do and was always actively pursuing it. I don't ever remember a time thinking that I wasn't pursuing that, even if I wasn't actually concentrating on, you know, panel by panel storytelling practice. It was something I always, you know, had a love for, and I think subconsciously it all got ingrained and, you know, grooved into my brain to when I did get started professionally, I was able to move forward in interesting ways, I hope.
Sure. I mean, as many people who watch this may know, that I am a DJ. So I've often had that conversation with my parents and also with people at school when I said, okay, when are you going to get a proper job? And I can imagine, so like you say, you took that course in advertising and advertising art and design. Did you ever have the sit down conversation? Okay, illustrative arts, you know, that's where you know you can actually earn some money as a career. Do you really want to do comics? Did you ever get the sit down conversation of, are you going to do this something proper?
Yes and no. It wasn't. It's kind of tough to say. You know, it was a mixed bag in terms of the type of support. Um, so in a lot of ways, I think they just kind of like, well, he's going to sort it out. One way or another, it'll get sorted out. The advertising art and design thing, what was fascinating to me about that class was it was different than any of the other types of basic classes that you could take in high school. It was sort of like this off-campus occupational program training course that I did for 2 years. And the number one thing I learned about that, it didn't really help me become a better craftsman at the, you know, a better artist in terms of how well something is drawn or painted. But what it did for me was teach me a lot about focusing on what is the idea behind the drawing itself, that, and get to the root of that. And I think that is also had the biggest impact on everything I've done throughout my career in terms of the way I try to use iconography and symbolism. I think all stems from what I learned in that class. It was interesting to, you know, have a teacher that focused on that. And unfortunately, you know, sometimes he would use me as an example because I sometimes would draw, you know, images of horror creatures and things like that, which he was not very appreciative of. But he saw that I would try to put ideas behind the drawings, and so he would use me as an example, as saying, "Look, it doesn't matter how good of an artist you are; you have to be able to convey some point of view." So
that makes sense as well. I mean, I can also imagine as well that a course like that also teaches you the structure of actually getting a project done. And I've spoken to a number of comic artists that they say it's fine to have whatever skills you have, but to actually get the job done and to have that sense of completion. And I can imagine a course like that would teach you some of that kind of like that structure, as it were. when it comes to putting your artwork together. I often find that artists as well have that imposter syndrome very well into their career about when they feel that they are a professional comics artist. Can you remember when that was, when you actually went, you know what, I am a professional comics artist?
Probably when I got my first paycheck. And even then it was precarious, probably.
What was that for?
What was that?
What was that for?
Oh, probably, I think the first time I got paid was when I lived in the Bay Area. I did this thing for a computer magazine. I don't remember what the heck it was called. I think it was like PC Magazine or something like that. And they were trying to do this comic strip thing. And I got a job doing some pencil work for that. And then a job for the same writer doing some other like science hero thing that he wanted to do. I did some pages for. I remember getting some sort of payment for that. I don't remember how much. It wasn't a lot. $50 or something like that.
I know that your first interior work was 1991 for, was it Hero Alliance Quarterly, I believe. What was it that kind of attracted you to doing interior work, and where did you kind of learn the structure of doing sequential storytelling? I mean, I always find it interesting how, when I speak to artists, how they learn the idea of the page turn and the reveal and the mechanics of actually putting in interior artwork together. What was where were you learning that from?
Oh, I don't know. I think through osmosis, really. Just, being so in love with comics and the way they tell a story. I really just kind of soaked it all in. And so when I first started doing interior pages, I just tried to figure out ways to really pay attention to what the script writer is saying, and try to do that to the best I could, and make sure it had a sense of visual movement, and conveyed story. So, it's one thing to say I'm an artist, but I think it's quite a different thing to say someone is a comic book artist.
Sure.
Comic book artists are really mostly interested in telling stories using images, right? So I kind of view myself as like someone who's just interested in trying to convey a story as best as I can in as interesting a way as I can.
Well, I mean, I think something that stands you out as a comic artist is, I mean, you don't necessarily pin down a specific art style. I mean, there's everything from very strong lines to very big paint panels. So you kind of can move those around from project to project, and that's fantastic. But something that kind of really does define yourself as an artist is those kind of different ways of using the page and using panels and moving around the page. I just wondering how long it takes you to kind of work those per project. I mean, in terms of defining what the tone and the technique is going to be for each project.
Yeah, the time thing is interesting. I mean, earlier in my career, I tried to be faster. And I think it shows. I think the work is not as good. I found that I got stronger the more time I allowed myself to focus on what needs to be done. But what's surprisingly about taking longer is I don't actually do much in the way of thumbnails anymore. Or preliminary drawings. I kind of let the drawings live in my head before I start trying to put it on the page. And one of the reasons why I've done that is I found that when I did try to do thumbnails, I was so married to what I did in the thumbnail that I would fight with it when trying to actually draw it. So if the drawing itself was saying no, this thumbnail is bullshit. Move on. I would sit there and struggle with that, and I think it showed in the work as well. So I ditched that and started saying, letting the images live in my head and have a vague idea of what I wanted to do. And then as I would start to lay it out on the page, if it started telling me otherwise, I would listen and let the drawing kind of dictate to me what it's going to do. And surprisingly, you would think that would be faster, but it's not necessarily faster. It's just less process drawings, I guess. And I spend more time kind of staring at what I'm doing and making sure it's working in a way I hope it works, the way it's telling me it should work. Some of these broader double page spread, elaborate things I've done, I'm sure there can be some argument on how successful some of those are. I think some work probably really well and some not so much, but I would rather try something different and have it not work to the best it could be than not try it at all. I guess that's just my own way of looking for finding my own path of being a storyteller, I guess.
Sure. And also connecting to that project, which is, I'm curious as to what, when you first kind of started, and like you say, you were learning and developing your style when you were getting into starting as a comic artist, like as we all do. What were the elements that kind of appealed to you for a project shy of the paycheck, and and how has that evolved over the years? What now draws you to a project? What's the things that kind of have to be in place for you to be attached?
I think, early on, of course, the paycheck was a big deal because, you just wanted to establish yourself and do this as an actual career that hopefully you could make a living off of in some form. But after a certain point, you start to go, at least for me, needing to work on things that I could care about. And because I kind of felt like if I didn't care about it, I'm not going to produce the best work I can produce for this thing because I don't care about it. So very quickly it became something beyond just getting a paycheck. It had to be a story that I could look at and go, I could get into this. And I have such a wide variety of interests and tastes in terms of comics that it's relatively easy for me to find those connective points for me for a wide variety of reasons. I feel like I can be just as excited to sink my teeth into a horror tale as much as a sci-fi tale, as much as a superhero tale. It just depends on what I'm seeing in the concept, I guess, when I'm looking at the pitch or what an editor is saying this thing is supposed to be.
Sure. We do have a number of questions coming in on the Q&A, and we will dive into those very shortly indeed. If you do have any other questions, anyone who's watching, dive in. We'll put them to Jim very shortly indeed. We'll go into a couple of viewer questions in a bit. But to come back to those things that appeal to the project, you've worked with some of the strongest personalities in comics, from Alan Moore, from just across the board. It's a wide gamut of those creators that you've worked with, those writers. What's your take on the conversation between about collaboration and ownership? The crediting of who is the creator of a book. What's your take on that conversation?
I think the creators of a book are the primary progenitors of the content. So, you have your writer and artist. Neither of them could tell a comic book story without the other. Granted, there are some comic artists, like myself that, dabble in writing here and there. But I feel like a comic is really, in most cases, is a combination of two individuals coming together to create something beyond themselves. that they would do on their own. So I definitely feel like, I'm not sure what the conversations are that are going on out there about it, but I feel like authorship is really both those people, the artist and the writer. And it's evidenced in every time you pick up a comic. There are times where a great artist can elevate a mediocre story into something that was much more of a surprise than people might anticipate, or a weaker artist can deteriorate the quality of a better story. It's impossible to separate the two, I think.
Sure. I think the conversation that I've been seeing, and I think it's the art cred hashtag that did the rounds, certainly for the last couple of years. It's that sense whenever you see something in previews and it's the the writer that's credited as the creator of the book, and the artist is almost the second tier, and then you get the conversation about letterers and colorers and editors, where they belong on the cover. For myself, it's everybody who's involved should be on the cover. Everyone because it is such a symbiotic thing. Because certainly with Mr. Keith as your letterer, and has been for a while. I mean, what's that relationship like? Because I was involved in a conversation recently about a letterer should be allowed to change some of the word sound effects, for example. What's your relationship with that? Would you let the first name's escaping me?
Todd,
thank you. In terms of that, I mean, that's kind of backwards and forwards in terms of what he does with his work on top of yours.
Yeah, my relationship with Todd is a very close one in terms of the work that we do. Early on in my career, I worked with a wide variety of letterers, and they're all good in their various ways. But I found that the more I started going into the design sense of thinking being applied to comics, that all that ingrained advertising, art, and design stuff that was shoved into my head became more and more of an important storytelling aspect to what I was doing. I felt like I needed to have more understanding and control over lettering placement. I felt like some of the more elaborate things that I might come up with can't be done unless if I think about that ahead of time. So same goes for color sometimes. Sometimes I have to think about the color ahead of time, just so I have a sense of direction and flow of what I'm trying to do. But Todd is extremely open to our process, and I trust him implicitly. As far as the sound effects are concerned, it's funny because everything's gotten so digital, and I kind of, in some ways hate that. I hate that original comics art now, the 99% of the time, it seems like the lettering is done digitally these days. And so I miss seeing that on the originals, particularly with sound effects. A lot of sound effects today sometimes have this, they're just laid over the top feeling and not integrated into the composition as much as they were in the past. So I've gotten accustomed to actually drawing all my own sound effects on my pages now. I was terrible at it at first, but I've gotten a little bit better. And I like doing that because I can now use them as storytelling devices in terms of visual flow of how I want your eye to move. And Todd's perfectly fine with that. He doesn't, I think if I did something that he hated, he would let me know.
Yeah, I was about to say, I can imagine that he'd have a word. He'd have some pointers to send in your direction.
Exactly.
So we've got a couple of these questions that have come in. Thank you very much indeed to several people who have made comments. First and foremost, we've got Toby, who's saying excellent ROM art that we've been showcasing on the screen. I also remember getting Micronauts, ROM Space Knight, and Battlestar Galactica books off the spinning rack, drawn to those books by the toys as well. For myself, it wasn't Micronauts, it was certainly ROM Space Knight. I am a massive ROM fan. Very much I can totally understand that. And so Lister Smeg has jumped in. very good with some big questions. So let's see what Solicitor Smeg says. Do you prefer working for the big two, DC and Marvel, over publishers of creator-owned books like Image? I'm actually going to get into other things similar to that question, but it's a big one to start with. So yeah, which kind of approach appeals to you out of the two?
I don't know. I mean, I definitely prefer creator-owned for various reasons, because it's something that is yours. You have control over it. It's your decisions on every aspect of what you're trying to do with the story. You and your co-creator partners, and it's something you build from scratch. Where most of the stuff you do for, you say, DC and Marvel, or iconic things that have existed, before you were born in some cases, and those have a certain thing that you have to relatively adhere to. It's a different creative outlet, I guess you could say. I don't know if in terms of creative satisfaction, I don't know if I could say one tops the other. I guess it just depends in what mood you're in.
Sure.
So the time I spent on Batwoman is certainly as enjoyable to the time I'm spending on my current creator-owned project, or the time that I spent on Sandman Overture. But they're two different things. I know that going in, and I can kind of like compartmentalize that to some degree. The tougher part is dealing with the different politics involved when you're dealing with, DC or Marvel. There's a whole different a parameter that you have to kind of navigate.
Sure. I mean, what I was going to lead on to was the fact that you have worked on both superhero comics and also your original stories and original, non-cape stuff, if you want to kind of put it like that. I mean, such as Promethea and Sandman. I mean, we've seen such a rapid growth in independent non-cape stories over the years. What kind of stories appeal to you nowadays? Which ones kind of draw, which is the one that kind of grabs your attention the most?
Pretty much mostly the creator-owned market stuff. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I love a great Batman tale or great Spider-Man tale. I read probably too much of that stuff. But there's something I find creatively stimulating in seeing something that's wholly original, belonging to that specific team of creators. And for myself personally, if the mechanics and economics allowed, I'd be perfectly fine just telling my own stories, my own creator-owned visions for the rest of my life, and be perfectly happy not having to go and draw, a corporate character. I don't want to dog corporate characters, though. I don't want to give the wrong impression, because I think there's plenty of room for both.
Sure.
I just feel like I've been doing this so long now that ideally I would prefer to be in a position where that my main focus is only things that are mine, that that matter to me the most.
Sure. Dare I ask if you can point out any books that are currently on your pull list? Any independent and creator-owned books that are attracting your attention at the moment?
Oh, that's tough. That's tough. Of course, my mind is going to go blank because there's just too many things.
Sorry, this is me putting you on the spot.
Yeah. As my wife can attest, I bring in too many comics into the house. Quite a bit of independent stuff. I'm always excited for the next Hernandez Brothers book, or some of the Fantagraphic stuff, and a lot of the European books that come out. So always excited for those. A lot of the stuff the Image does, I'm always excited for. But trying to nail it down to one thing specifically, that's difficult.
Fair enough. And I wouldn't want to put you too much on the spot in case you sort of like you mentioned a couple of names and neglected to mention others. So we'll kind of they'll let you off the hotspot on that one. That's fine. We've got a question from Sean Thomas on Facebook. It's not showing up in the feed, but I do have the Facebook window open, so I will ask this. It's obviously it's nice to see that the new Batwoman TV series is hugely influenced by your work. Did you have any input or a lot of input into that particular project?
None at all.
None at all.
I don't know. I haven't watched the show.
Okay.
Other than the first episode to try to see kind of what the feel was going to be. I haven't really watched the show very much. I've heard about some of the things that were done on it. And I'm glad that people seem to be liking it. But for me, I don't think I could watch the show without being biased, because
you've got so much invested.
Yeah, the stuff that myself, Hayden Blackman, and Greg Rucka put into it, I just felt like, granted, every story has its flaws, but I felt like we did quality work, and I just don't think I could watch a television show or even a film based on something concretely that I've done without being too biased and too judgmental over it. So I find it better to just kind of stay away. But if others are finding things in it that they like and things that they recognize, that's wonderful.
Sure. I can imagine as well with that particular project, there's also that element of the, I'm going to say, baggage that came with the project, with the controversies and the creative difficulties that you experienced with DC in that regard. I mean, what was, I'm trying to work out the question here really, which is how you can kind of take that all of that energy that you poured into that project and all of those the good and the bad that went, and how you can then kind of look back and how you look back on Batwoman.
I don't know. It's like this weird compartmentalization thing, because all of us that worked on the stuff love the character. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it in the first place.
Sure.
I'm proud of the work that we did. I think we, for the most part, did a lot of things we set out to do. But yeah, there was, it was fraught with some difficulties. But I'm not the only one that would have that complaint of some of their time at DC during those years. It's just one of those things, and it's hard to quantify a lot of coherent thought about it.
Sure. What when you think back then on that project, which, like you say, it's compartmentalized, it's on the shelf, and it is this crystal of creative work that you were involved in. What do you see when you look back on those days?
I think the number one thing is it's two things. I guess it's a two-sided coin. We did some good work. I think it was highly creative work. I think we were able to push some expectations of what people thought the project could be, while at the same time it is rough to know that we didn't get to finish it. We didn't get to put our final say on what we were doing there. But we're not the only comic that has happened to. I mean, sure. Comics history is fraught with those stories where creators don't get to finish what they were setting out to do for various reasons. And that sort of is just the way it goes. I mean, I've had other projects that have gone down a similar path where we just didn't get to finish what we set out to do. That's just in some ways the nature of the business, sure. Unfortunately.
Fair enough. In terms of how the industry is in its current state, and certainly how it's facing its current difficulties in the light of Corona, and how everything seems to have drawn to a standstill at a very, very quick time. It's all kind of happened in almost in an instant. What's your take on the current landscape of the comics industry? I'm trying to word this without getting myself into any trouble. Do they kind of deserve the dire straits they're in with the way that they were set out, or were they not forward thinking enough to weather the storm, as it were?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's tough.
That was a serious question. I think I should drink this cider more.
Well, I mean, I kind of feel like, with these sorts of situations, a lot of times it's hindsight, it's 2020, right?
Sure.
So I think, in the comics industry, business moved as business was dictated to move. The way the parameters were set up, some of the choices made might not have been the wisest choices. I mean, I've made comments to friends of mine about the eggs all in one basket scenario that the industry has now seen the results of because of everything being shut down. Publishers are having a really hard time being able to navigate that, which in turn, because without the comics retailers, they can't really function. And the comics retailers currently can't function themselves. And there's a domino effect that's happening because of that, where you're seeing publishers having to halt. Money is halting, therefore creators their work is being dissipated, their financial resources is being dissipated profoundly to them, as well as the comic book stores. I don't know what the answers are to that.
I'm finding it interesting that we're seeing, I mean, for example, the Creators for Comics project that's currently doing the rounds on Twitter, which is just absolutely incredible. The way that the community of creators have come together to help retailers. I'm finding it interesting that a lot of creators are now taking this downtime to look at personal projects, those ones that have possibly been on the shelf a little bit, gathering dust, and right, I've now got the time to kind of take this project and dust it off and look at it. And I'm wondering that we're possibly going to be entering once the dust settles, that we're going to see this real plethora of creator-owned work.
Yeah, I hope so. It'd be nice. Again, it's all going to fall onto the shoulders of what kind of market exists after this. Different parts of the world have handled the financial fallout of this in various ways. Some have handled it better than others. I don't know. It's such an unknown quantity at this point.
Sure.
Still, how we're going to come out of it and recover. We will recover, but what will things look like, and what will be the state of the industry afterward? How many publishers will still be here afterward? Sure. That's a big question right now. And from various people I've talked to, there is real no answers at this point.
I think we're all in that kind of that vague limbo aspect. Yeah, I totally understand that. Tell you what, let's lighten the mood a little bit when it comes to the conversation.
Sure. Just one last comment.
Oh, yeah, go.
So the creators for creators for comics thing, I think is fantastic. I'm doing a little piece for that myself. I think it's really a great thing, and hopefully, it will help a lot of people, the retailers, because like I said, without them, we can't do what we do. But if this situation continues to develop and be prolonged in ways that are not foreseen, I think, I fear for the people that make the comics themselves, and their stability, their futures. So I don't know what the answer is to that either. I mean, something like, Creators for Comics could be done for the comics workers, but in what form and how would that function, and how would that be financially distributed, that sort of thing. But I feel like we're going to see the fallout from this over the next year, I think, for sure.
Sure. If there's one thing that I feel that the Creators of the Comics thing could have done a little bit better, is actually make it more of a raffle, because then someone who doesn't have several £1,000s to bid on a Jim Lee sketch. Then there's more money coming in from the various smaller bids, more money raised. I don't know. I'd like to have possibly seen more of that as an element of it. But at the end of the day, it's not done. There's still more of these pieces going out. So hopefully some people will take that out.
The way this is going, I could see there being a round 2 of this event.
Yeah.
In terms of raising funds, we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. To change the topic then and lighten the mood a little bit, let's go into a couple of random questions which I put down. In terms of putting a comic together, what for you is the most rewarding aspect, the most rewarding element of comics? Is it the completion of the work on the page, or is it the holding of the book, or is it the reaction from the fans? Where down the line, what for you is the most rewarding aspect of it?
Boy, that's a loaded question, because it's a kind of all over the place question in a way, because my feelings about what I'm doing and what I do change daily. There's some days where I'm like, that face came out well when I drew that face. And then there's times where I'm like, that was terrible. Why do I do this? Why am I doing this job? I suck, So it's like this weird love-hate relationship that you have, at least for myself, with what I'm doing. And so I kind of don't try to feel as much about it as I maybe should. I tend to have the most reaction to the results is when I see the thing in my hand. I used to hinge a lot more of how I felt about things based on reader response or critical review response. I found that quickly was an emotional black hole to fall into, because if I'm going, I felt like if I paid attention to the positive things that a critic might say or a fan might say, as much as I appreciate that they appreciate what I've done, then I have to hold equal weight to the awful things that people might say and have said. So I've kind of had to take myself out of it as much as I can and try to focus on, like, well, is this work that I can say is the best that I could do today? And try to keep my head in that space as much as possible. Sometimes that's a losing battle unto itself, but that's what I try to do for my own sanity, is just focus on doing work that hopefully I myself, if I saw it sitting on a shelf and I didn't know what it was, that I myself would be gravitating to it, to create something that I myself would like to read.
That makes sense. I'll do this question from Solicitor Smeg, and then I'll come back to, like I say, a couple of questions which I've got, including this one. When it comes to established characters, and I'd like to try and get it up on the screen. There it is. When it comes to established characters that you have done great work on, like Batwoman, do you find yourself getting emotional when someone else isn't doing the character justice? That's a question and a half.
That's a trick question. It depends on how close I was with that character. In most of the times, I try to, if I felt like I've put a very personal stamp on a character beyond something like, say, Batman. Like, Batman existed well before I came along, but in comparison to this iteration of Batwoman, was developed by Greg Rucka, myself, and some among others, and Hayden Blackman, and we put a lot of love into it and built it from scratch in a way, even though it deals with themes that were already established from DC Comics. I feel like when it's something like that, when you've built it up from the bottom up, that it's hard to not be biased about the work. So in some ways, I'm sure there's plenty of other creators that have done wonderful things with Batwoman, but I have not read them because I fear my own shortcomings about my own feelings would judge their work unfairly. So it's almost the same attitude as I have with the TV show. I find it better to let them do what they're going to do and not try to partake in it, knowing that my own psychology comes into play. Being aware of my own psychology in that mix, I think, is important, and find it better to just stay away from it. Might be disappointing for some people to hear that, because if they're continuing to read the adventures of Batwoman from somebody else and are enjoying that, might hope that I see the same thing that they see. But I guess I'm a little shallow in that department.
No, I mean, I totally get it. I can imagine as well the fact that you did. I mean, it's painfully obvious, not painfully obvious, but it's incredibly obvious from the pages of the book. And I've got the run myself. I read them quite regularly. You did pour your heart and soul onto those pages. It was a book that you clearly had so much invested in, and a story you had so much invested in. You've got Jennifer, who's jumped in and saying that Jim's version of Batwoman is best by far. So there you go. If we're going to give you some kind of smoke up your ass forward statement there, we'll definitely go with that. So I think we'll almost let you go. I've got some quick fire questions which I will wrap up on. Anybody else who has a question? I'm going to ask a question now, and then we'll get into any last minute ones. So dive in on the comments now. We'll do with this, and we'll see what you come up with. When this situation with Corona is resolved and the lockdown is lifted, I, for one, am going to be doing my utmost to kind of reconnect with the world. And I want to try and meet as many of the people that I've yet to talk to, because I follow a number of people on Twitter. I would like to actually meet them in real life now, and I want to reconnect. Is there anybody on your Twitter feed or your social media feeds that you haven't met yet? Any heroes that you would like to meet in real life?
Oh,
top of your head.
Oh my gosh. Probably most of the creators that I follow on Twitter, that I engage with back and forth occasionally, most of them I've never met. I've only met them on Twitter,
right.
And have enjoyed the little interactions. I know it's fun to have those interactions, but at the same time, it's not quite the same as, say, sitting down and taking 20 minutes to a half an hour or whatever to have a real conversation. I think that'd be tremendous to do.
I think when this is all done, I'm going to be hunting down Bill Sienkiewicz.
Or
I'm going to be basically bouncing around the planet just trying to hunt him down. I think that's the one I definitely want to try and get hold of. Quick fire questions. Music in the studio, and if so, what is on the jukebox?
I play music most of the time when I'm working. There's some times where I don't, where for whatever reason I just feel like I want it quiet. And I post those regularly on Twitter as I listen to them. It's usually vinyl records as well. But the last thing I listened to was Pentagram. It was like a collection of...
You're reaching over to find it, aren't you?
Yes. It's a collection of some of the earliest stuff called First Days Here from Pentagram, which was awesome. 70s kind of proto-metal stuff. But yeah, I'll listen. And then I also listen to the latest album by Marissa Nadler called For Her Crimes, or For My Crimes, which is great. But yeah, both my wife and I we're pretty big audiophiles, and we like a wide variety of things. We'll listen to all kinds of stuff. Anything from Run the Jewels to the Sisters of Mercy might come up in this stuff.
Nice. I've been going back through my old. I mean, I know that in this kind of situation, it's probably best to look at new, and you get the chance to listen and embrace new artists and new music. I know it was the anniversary release of the first Iron Maiden album. That was being played all day today. So that's been on. I've been listening to that all day today.
Yeah, you can't get much better than Iron Maiden.
Absolutely, man.
As far as new music, new artists that we've discovered, they've been around, but they're new to us. Have you heard Algiers?
No.
So good, incredibly powerful. I recommend you check that out.
There you go. I will dig that out first thing once we wrap this up. Like I say, quick fire questions. Who's your favorite Robin?
The Robin from Dark Knight, I think.
Kelly Jones.
Yeah.
Oh no, just Kelly. No.
Yeah. We know.
Kelly Jones is someone else entirely. Fair enough. Okay.
Fred just went down.
Yeah, I think I'll hand the nerd card in on that one. Fair enough. And if you had to pick the one book for someone to introduce yourself to your work off the shelf, what would it be?
Ooh, I'd say Promethea.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's probably, I maybe because even though it's not the newest work, I would say Promethea because I think it's the first book where I found myself on. So
that's interesting that you word it like that.
Yeah, I mean, that was such an amazing project in the fact that working with someone like Alan Moore, who, while so much has a singular vision, is at the same time so open. And the time I worked with him, I learned an incredible amount of things having that opportunity to work with him, not just from doing the work itself, but having those conversations with him, seeing how he crafts his stories, seeing how he crafts his scripts, everything. Working with him for 6 years affected everything I've done ever since. And because he's so open, when I would have conversations with him as we started to develop the project about whatever weird visual ideas I might have, went right along with his own. And he was, willing to go over the cliff with me. And I was willing to go over the cliff with him. And so I feel like my self-discovery as a comic storyteller really found itself with that project.
That's fantastic. Jennifer is jumping in and saying, and she's definitely, she's definitely being very effusive. That's my go-to when recommending his work as well. Good to know I'm not off base with Promethea. And it kind of goes to my final question, which, talking about that book and speaking about Alan Moore, my question is, exactly how mad a wizard are you?
I don't know. It depends on the day of the week.
It's one of my favorite Twitter handles that you have. And also the fact that you've joined us as well. Let me just see if I can just bring this up so people can see it, just in case they haven't quite twigged what the avatar is that you've chosen for this conversation. Nicole Williamson from one of the best films ever made.
Yes.
From Excalibur. I think that's just that kind of sums the back end of this conversation up completely. And I think that's just great that you've chosen that as the avatar. And I think we'll just wrap up with this one comment. This was the follow-on from the question from Solicitous Meg about being emotional about characters that you've worked on. And he basically says, I don't think I'm cut out to be a comic creator, because if someone wasn't doing my character justice, my first thought would be, how can I stone cold stunner this person without getting arrested? So kind of, well, I don't know if that's a way to finish on, but I think that's where we'll wrap things up.
The one thing I'll say about that particular avatar, I chose it because my wife Wendy she knows how much I love that film, and she found that photo to use for my avatar that I use for some of my email stuff. and so that avatar is connected to my email, and so I thought it was perfect to use here too. But yeah, she's the one who found that photo, knowing how much I love that film. She's the one who set up my email account, and she's like, well, "This is perfect." So.
It's a film which I was 9 years old and I was taken to the cinema to see it.
Yeah.
I got exposed to some very strange stuff as a youngster. So age 7, I was reading Philip K. Dick. That kind of, that's the kind of thing that will play with your head. Certainly seeing that film, seeing Excalibur age 9, that's the kind of thing which sticks with you. That definitely leads me to the kind of things that I'm interested in now. So
yeah, it's probably about the same age I saw it as well, I think. I love that movie. I can't get enough of that movie.
Great for it. Excellent stuff. So there we go. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I know that when we kind of were setting this up, I said that we would talk for about 30-40 minutes, something like that. We've done a great hour's worth of conversation and we've covered a lot of bases, and it's just been fantastic to talk to you. Thank you so much indeed for taking the time and coming on and chatting with us.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. It was fun.
Excellent. What projects have you got coming up that people can keep their eyes open for?
Oh, okay. I've got the thing I'm doing for Image Comics called Echolands. I'm currently drawing issue 6. We don't have a publication date yet. We were actually about to have that conversation when, the world collapsed on us. I'm not sure when that's going to come out, but I'm going to continue to work on that. And I've got some various other writing projects that have not had any form of announcement of any kind yet, so I can't really say what they are. But those I'm having fun with because I'm kind of acting as co-writer on some of those with a playwright here in Las Vegas, Scott David Johnson, who I've known for a while. He actually contributed a story to the Where We Live book that we did, that charity book that we did.
Who was it that brought that over? Basically, there was. It's going to kill me that I've forgotten his name. Basically, he brought it over to Portsmouth Comic Con and he managed to get it signed by a bunch of people as well. It's a book which holds a big place in my collection. It's incredible that you were involved in that.
Cool, thank you. So I'm doing some writing projects with him. One of them is an OGN that's well underway. The artist that's working on it is probably 4/5 done now, of 200 pages. So hopefully will be coming out sooner than later. Stuff like that.
Fair enough. And also, where can people follow you online on social media? Where do you kind of live the most?
I'm on Twitter the most, but I can also be found on Facebook.
For your sins.
Yeah. I've been meaning to set up an Instagram account. I just haven't done it, but I will at some point.
Well, I mean, it's like I say, it's been great to follow you on Twitter. It's been great to have the conversation with you online, and it's been great to have you joining us on the show. Jim, thank you very much indeed for your time, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Excellent. For myself, I'm back again on Sunday with another Talking Con, a cup of tea with an Englishman in San Diego. It's going to be a bit of a double header. We've got ourselves 2 guests that's going to be joining us. We've got Tony Lee. He is involved with Showmasters with putting their Artist Alley together, but we're going to be talking mostly about his comics career. And we're also going to be joined by Gil Cabrera. So very much 2 different conversations. Gil Cabrera, of course, is the former chair of the San Diego Convention Center. So we're going to talk to him about the relationship between the building and the city, and of course, that symbiotic relationship between the Convention Center and San Diego Comic-Con. All of that, of course, is going to prove an interesting conversation if we actually have an announcement from CCI between now and then, which I think we can all agree is kind of on the cards. We'll get into that And we'll talk about that on Sunday. As always, if you'd like to support the Hangout, if you'd like to go to patreon.com/EnglishmanSDCC, we'll be putting up some exclusive content over the course of the next couple of days, and it will kind of help me buy food and continue to live. So please do contribute to that Patreon if you can. Back again on Sunday to our normal time, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. GMT, for another Talking Con, a cup of tea with an Englishman in San Diego. Although, seeing as it is now 11 o'clock here in the UK, I'm going to continue drinking my pint of cider. From myself, from Jim, and from all of us, we'll see you soon. Take care. Goodbye. Although, I know.